Okay, so today we're going to go over nCloth and Vellum. I'm going to start off with some nCloth stuff. So if you've never done nCloth, basically it's just the in-house Maya cloth simulation program. You can find it up if you change your little settings menu to effects, and it's right up in here, up at the top. You've got all these wonderful, beautiful things that do a lot of various different things to make your simulation more stable or what have you, and we're going to go over most of those today. So the first thing I'm going to start you off with is showing you kind of like the different types of assets that you're going to need to prepare to start your simulation. So CFX generally comes towards the end of production. Once your animators start like getting their body mechanics finalized, then they'll hand that off to you, and maybe all they're going to adjust is like some facial expressions, and you can start working on the simulations. So they'll export an Alembic file for you, and you'll import that into your scene. And it will come out something like this. And maybe it'll have some like clothes or some like eyelashes or fingernails or whatever. You don't need any of those. All you need basically is just the body or whatever is going to be the collision object. So this is our model from Wander. She's cute, she's naked. Sorry, she doesn't have eyes, it's a little scary. But so I took away her teeth, her eyelashes, her fingernails. She had little rain boots too. And then she had a second layer of clothes that I'm just going to leave out for the purposes of making this simpler. But you can have two cloths and objects together if you need to, but it's a lot harder. You do them one at a time. So today we're just going to sim her little raincoat. So this is the animation, and I don't have the camera, which I probably should have used. But so she goes off in space and does her little cute walk thing. So when you're setting up your cloth pipeline, I'm using Houdini hotkeys, it is best to tell your animators to start everything in absolute perfect T-pose. You don't want your fingers curled, you don't want your facial expressions in a different pose, you want everything to be zeroed out and as clean as possible. And then if you start her at the origin, maybe at like frame -50 is what we chose, then if you have other problems, it's a lot easier to fix things if you have the animation start at the origin. And then after that, it takes about 10 frames, and still in T-pose, she translates over to where the animation starts. And so the animation starts over here, off in space, and she's still in T-pose by frame -40, and then she takes a couple of frames to get into her first position. Okay? So at frame -5, she's in her first position. Actually, I think she's there at 10. Yeah, so she's there at -10. And then she takes like a minute to settle into it. So giving those extra frames is going to help you keep your simulation a lot more stable, and it'll give it time to sort of relax. And once I go through the steps, that'll make a little bit more sense. But definitely that's something that you should be communicating with your animators, making sure that they understand. Because otherwise that will mess you up quite a bit. So that's your animation file. And again, you would just import that into your scene. And then, if you go out of isolate select mode, you have your actual piece of cloth that you want to move around. So this is a cute little raincoat that she wears. It's double-sided, so it's got a little bit of thickness to it. And this is the piece of geometry that will get the textures and the bump and like all that stuff, and this is what's actually getting rendered. So this is your render mesh, so I'll go ahead and rename that. Okay, and this is your anim geo. I like to keep everything nice and labeled correctly because you're going to have several different versions of the same thing, so try and keep your outliner clean and all of that stuff. So the issue with simming this raincoat, a lot of people make this mistake, is they sim the render mesh. We're not going to do that because, as you can see, this is really high poly, it's got a lot of verts, it's double-sided. That is going to be very, very bad for sim. It's going to be slow, it's going to cause bad collisions with the double-sided part. So what you need to do, preferably in the modeling stage, it's a lot easier, is you need to create a different version of it, which is going to be your low poly, one-sided version of the jacket. As you can see, they basically, if I just put them, nope, not that one. If I put them side by side, they look exactly the same, except one just has way less polygons, and it's one-sided. So you want the silhouette to match as perfectly as possible, but it's not going to have any of the details. If you sculpt like some extra wrinkles or pleats into it, then you want to get rid of those and just make sure that it's a simple, nice, evenly spread geometry. Even this mesh has a little bit uneven geometry. So like in the sleeves here, it's got a little bit of a cluster, so you can come in and, I need edge mode, and clean that up a little bit. Control delete, make sure you don't have any extra verts. Am I in symmetry mode? I'm not. I'll turn on symmetry mode. So this way you have a much cleaner mesh, and it's going to be less verts to sim, and it's going to make nice, smooth, flowing wrinkles and movements and stuff. Another option you have is, I did a couple of shots depending on the shot and like just how much movement there was. I had a couple different versions of this where it didn't have the collar and the lapels. If she was just sort of standing there, there was no point to sim the lapels bouncing around, so we just deleted those and didn't worry about that. So this object is going to be called your sim cage. Oh, I'm good at spelling.
Yep.
Still doing so well. We'll zero that back out. And again, these need to be at the origin in T-pose, history deleted, frozen transforms, nice clean geometry. Yeah, so that is your sim cage. And then we have your, this is going to be really ugly and really scary, and I'm sorry for it, your collision skin. So this is, again, just a low poly version of your animation. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. Either you can model it yourself, or Maya has a mesh reduce option. I think it's in modeling, but it doesn't work out great. So here, I'll show you. So this is just the T-pose version of it. There's no animation on this one. You do, I think it's modify. No, it's mesh reduce. So it doesn't do the greatest job of it, and sometimes it can look a lot uglier than this, but you still have a lot of geometry giving you detail around the nose and the eyes and the lips that you really just don't need because we're simming her jacket, so her face doesn't really matter. So I'll just undo that. So the way that I created this one, this ugly boy, was I took it into Houdini and reduced the mesh that way. So I can show you guys real quick how to do that. This is honestly like the fastest way to do it, I think. I'm gonna turn your stuff off, Devon.
Yeah, you could just make another GeoNode.
Yep, that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, so if you don't have Houdini, use the Maya option or model it yourself. It just has to be in the ballpark of what you want it to look like. There's a couple of settings in nCloth that you can mess with to make it match a little bit more, and we'll go over those too. But if you go into Houdini, you make a GeoNode. Is anyone here like super not familiar with Houdini? Most guys? Okay, that's fine. So open up Houdini. This is where you put your objects. This is kind of like your outliner, but it's a little bit different. So you just hit tab to make nodes come up, just like you do in the Maya node editor. And right now we're just going to throw down a geo node, and in there you can double click on it to open it up, hit tab again, file, and this is where you would import. You click this little button up here, and I'm going to go to the desktop and open up, maybe it's not in there. So this is where you would put your OBJ high polyclide. Yep, that's the one I want. So there she is. And inside this geometry node, you would then put down, what is it, a VDB from polygons? Is that right?
I'm not gonna just do a remesh.
I usually do the VDB because it makes it a little bit smoother. I think it's VDB from polygons. Yeah. So this node, kind of confusing, but basically all it does is turn this into a blob. She's been censored, yeah. And then you can mess with the voxel size. Basically, voxels are 3 pixels. So you just want to like mess with that until it's like kind of a blobbier version of what you want. And then from there, you will throw down a remesh node. And this will give you a nice, even version of this. And you can change your target edge length. This is relative, so you want to make sure that if your geometry is really big, you're going to have to make your target edge length really big. If your geometry is small, don't do that. So you can mess around with this, be gentle with it. You want to make like a nice balanced version of it's a smooth and like even edge flow and not a lot of edges, and that can be sort of like something you have to like mess back and forth with or whatever. But again, this is not the only way that you have to do this, just an option. So that's how I did her, and that's why she's ugly. And it took out all of the details like the hands and the fingers and like the eyeballs and the ears, all the stuff you don't need. So that's how I ended up with her, and she's ugly and awful, but she's a lot less polygons, and she's going to be a lot quicker to sim, which is going to be very helpful for this demo because these computers that we're using are not great, so it's going to be a little slow, so I apologize for that. Okay, so this is going to be our low poly collision skin. Geo. I like to label everything with like Geo or like a group node, or like make sure that you have all those labeled properly, because again, you're going to have a bunch of different items and you're going to have like blend shapes and all different things, and you want to keep it all straight, because if you connect the wrong things, then it's just going to mess you up, and sometimes it can be hard to go back. This is another one of those things that you want to be saving constantly, because it's possible they will crash or that you'll do something that you didn't realize. Turn on your autosave, make sure that you have lots of versions. Okay, so that's the collision skin. Then you want a T-pose version with no animation of your high poly version. So that's all that this is. There's no animation on it, no keyframes, deformations, anything like that. It's just a blank canvas of the original mesh. So we'll just call that high poly geo. So yes, so those are our original assets that we're going to start out with, and then we're going to do some stuff to them. So a lot like with doing rigs and setting up different deformations, you want to have sort of a system of buffers when you're doing this. So that's why we have all these different pieces. And what we're going to do is basically we're going to make the jacket move with the animation without doing any simulation on it first. And then we'll have a animated version of the jacket that we will do the simulation on. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. We're going to start with the Cage Geo. We're going to duplicate it a couple times. You will want one that will be your Cage Wrap Geo. And what's the other one? Cage rest mesh. I'm so good at typing, guys. Okay. Keep that for now. Okay. So, just kidding, we need one more. Then you also need your SimCage ref geo. So, this is your original one that we're going to use that as a simulation. Your wrap geo, we're going to wrap to the animation using a wrap deformer, which we're not going to keep because those are slow, so be careful with wrap deformers when you're using them. Your rest mesh is just sort of your blank canvas in case you mess something up. There are other ways that you can use it, but they don't work in this version of Maya on the student computers, so we're not going to mess with that. But basically I just use it as in case I screw up, I have a blank version that doesn't have anything messed up with it. It doesn't have any deformers or animation or sim or anything on it. Then your SimCage ref is what we're using as the buffer. So that's later down the line, so that one doesn't get messed with. So we'll take your wrap geo, and we will wrap it to the animation, do deform, wrap, create, and then we will take your wrap geo and we will just cache it out as an alembic. Do the whole frame range, including the T-pose run-up that you're gonna want whenever you're doing these caches, even when you're doing the final sim cache of your final render mesh simulated cage. I like to do the whole frame range just in case there's some reason that you need the previous frames. So a couple of check marks that you need to do in the Alembic export. You want your UVs on, you want it to be in world space, right UV set, and if you're using Unreal, you want right face sets. So make sure you have all those on and then just export it. I already have a couple of versions of this. We'll just put it here. So this is our SimCage wrap geo.abc. We will export that. And if we isolate it, you can see it goes off in space. And it's following along with her little walk cycle. So the sleeves are in the right place, but the rest of the bottom is kind of doing funky things, so that's why the wrap doesn't work for final animation. You got to do the sim on it later. But it gets it going in the right place, and it gets it moving from the origin to her animation. So we can go ahead and hide that, and we will import the Alembic file, because the reason we export it as an Alembic is, again, the wraps are very slow, so if you export it, then you don't have that deformer on there. So we're just going to import it back. Where did I put it under? Assets? Nope. Cache. Okay. Oh, because of that one. So I'm going to rename this to SimCage wrap ABC, because that's the ABC file and not the actual one that's being deformed. Again, to keep things straight and clear so you know what's going on. Okay, so next step is get this thing moving and simming with the body. But like I said, this one is way too high poly. It's going to clog things up, especially on these slow machines. So we want our ugly low poly skin to follow the animation, and we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did, except with that. So if you start your animation out at T-pose, it's less steps. You can just wrap the low poly to the animation. If it is not started out at T-pose, that's what this extra T-pose no anim version is. So what you would do is you would wrap your low poly version to this and then blend shape this to the animation. Does that make sense? But so I can do that real quick, but this animation is, again, started out of the origin, so we could do this in less steps if we wanted to. So I'm going to take the ugly low poly and I'm going to wrap it to the high poly. Wrap. And then I'm going to take the high poly and click the animation first, then the high poly, and blend shape it. We'll call this anim wrap blend shape. Create. And we'll turn that on. And we'll go out here in space, and we can see that our ugly low poly skin is following along. So again, we're just going to cache that out as an Alembic to keep it clean and keep the wraps and everything off of it. So we'll call that low poly wrap ABC. That'll follow along, and we'll have that. So we'll go ahead and hide the wrapped version and the high poly version, and cache, Alembic cache, import Alembic, and we'll just drag that guy right in. Here it is. And again, rename it to ABC. So at this point, we have an animated low poly version. To keep things not confusing, I like to hide the actual animation Alembic, and then you get to look at this ugly thing for the rest of the time, which is quite sad, but we do our best. Okay, so now we got this render mesh. We'll go ahead and hide that and put that out of the way. And then we got that and that moving. But one of the issues with doing this simulation is everything's in this really ugly Lambert, and it can be kind of difficult to tell things apart. So an easy way to sort of make things more clear for yourself with what piece of mesh is doing what is you can color code them. And I have a couple of shaders that I already made before this demo, and they're just Lamberts with a color on them. And I have labeled them to be the name of the object that I'm going to assign them to, and then material as the suffix. So we're going to make our sim cage, which is this. We're going to make that this nice, pretty blue. Maybe we will. Do I have to turn on 6? There we go. And then our sim cage ref, which again will come in later. We're going to make that this nice green. Behind that. Where's my sim cage? This mesh. Ah, it's hidden. Do you not want to be this color? What am I doing wrong here? Okay, that's what I did. Hide that. This is what I want to be green, yeah. So your sim cage ref is gonna be green. Your sim cage wrap is going to be this blue. And then your rest mesh, make it purple. That work? Yes, it did. And your render mesh, you can make it like a burgundy or something. Those are just like the colors that that I was showed by Tim Steele, who taught me how to do all of this. Doesn't want to. Bless you. Doesn't want to assign to that one. Well, I guess that one's gonna be gray.
You keep clicking off of it, I think.
Is that what I'm doing?
Yeah.
There it goes. Okay, you're right. So you want everything to just be different colors so you know exactly what's going on and what's moving. And you can keep things hidden also, that will help you, or add display layers, whatever you want to do to keep yourself organized. So now that everything is like a different color and we can tell the difference, And this will also help if you're doing, if you're checking to see if the mesh is interpenetrating or like busting through the sleeves. You might miss it if they're the same color. Sometimes I like to turn the body like bright ugly red to see the difference if you're doing like real cleanup, but for now it's fine. So, all right, so now we have animation, keep using Houdini keys, and what we want is for this one to start simulating. So we have it in this nice little T-pose at 40, but before then it's like flying through space, and that's going to affect your sim. So we're going to start the nCloth simulation at frame -40, and that's why we had it follow along with the animation, so that we don't have to have it simulating to get it into the right position. So we'll go back into our effects menu, and we will click our nCloth material. We'll go up to nCloth and create nCloth, create new solver, and go ahead and do it. And then now it will just not work the way, there it goes, yeah. So it'll kind of just fall off her body down into space, which is not what we want. So we have to make sure that we make this guy a collider. We want it to hit her and move along with her body. So nCloth, create the passive collider. And if you're doing a scene that you're going to have multiple colliders, like I was doing boots and maybe like a lunchbox or a backpack with her, so I'll come in here and make sure I label these. So nRigid, body. Okay, so now it's going to collide with her body, and we'll go ahead and we'll come into the nucleus. This is where you're going to basically set how the world works. And the nucleus is where your simulation start frame is. So right now we want it to start on frame -40. Okay? The next thing that you want to set up on your simulation is your space scale. So if we go back to the origin, each of these units is about, I think it's 1 meter per unit, which is not at all the right size for her. So your space scale basically is just how big the world is, and it will adjust that like 1 meter per unit thing. So again, this is scale dependent, so this number is not going to be the same for every time. I think for her we were using 0.05, and that's going to make your simulation change a lot. So what you want to do is start your simulation out and figure out what your space scale is first. So run a couple of tests and just get like, basically get it to behave kind of normal. And then from there you can go up to maybe like 0.06 or like go down to like 0.03, and like once you're fine tuning it a little bit more, but you really don't want to change that much at all, because it will mess with the rest of your settings that you're going to change later. Because once you change this, all of the settings that you've put work into before are completely scrapped. They're all interdependent on each other and scale dependent. So we're just going to start out with 0.05. And from there, we will see what it looks like. Nope, please put me on my nCloth. Hello. Okay. So now it's doing some crazy things. What's up with that? Let's find out. So basically, we zoom in a little bit. Maybe not too much. Okay. So there's a lot of things happening with this. One of them is that I think this might actually be a space scale issue.
Yeah, I think it might be like even too small.
Might be. All right. We'll put it at 0.5.
Yeah, so it's at like 0.03 right now. It's like teeny.
Okay. So yeah, you want to set that first before you go and mess with your other stuff. Let's do 0.5. See how that looks. A little bit better, but it's still falling off her body. So now we get to do the fun stuff. Again, go back to your origin, and we're going to basically pin the cloth to her body. This is a little bit finicky, I'm not gonna lie. So we want the verts to stick to her body like they would in a normal coat, otherwise it's just gonna like fall right off every time she moves, because for some reason it doesn't work like it does in real life. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into Vertex mode on the jacket. Please. And we're gonna pick some verts, maybe along here, we'll say. Not that many. And you can figure out what's gonna work best for, depending on like what your cloth looks like and like what type of cloth it is, and like where it hangs on the character. And then we're gonna go, again, in your FX menu. This is under End Constraint. So you're gonna select your verts and then your object that you want it to stick to, End Constraint, and point to surface. Okay? And sometimes it will work. And you'll see these little green dots appear, and there's supposed to be one per vertice, but again, it's very finicky and may not work. If you can't get it to work, you want to always use this little button right here. Just click it a couple times, and that's just going to set everything back to 0. If things are not working the way you expect it to, a lot of times that's the solution. Just reset the timeline. If not, sometimes it will get angry at you for selecting verts with your mouse, and it will work better if you drag select them, but that's not as accurate. So again, it's a little bit finicky. So sometimes you can just close Maya and reopen it, and it will work fine. But yeah, so that's basically going to create a constraint going from those verts to her body, and it will keep it pinned to the top of her. And then once we see, it put one down here. I don't know what's up with that. And watch her go off in space. Oh. And now it's sticking to her body a little bit better. A little bit better. Okay, so yeah, it's not ideal. So the next thing that we probably want to do with this is we probably want to stiffen up her coat a little bit so we can see more what's going on. So we're going to click on our nCloth, and we're going to go into our attribute editor. There's a couple different things you can mess with in here. Collisions and dynamic properties are where you're going to want to reside primarily. So for the collisions, we'll go back to T-pose. So for the collisions, it's usually best to turn friction and stickiness to 0 when you're starting out. You can add more to that later once you get the look and feel of it working and getting it stable, which is the biggest hurdle, honestly. If your animation's not great or if your model's not great, getting it stable it's a learning curve, and it's going to take practice. The next thing is your collision width. So before we were looking at the coat and it was double-sided, it had a little bit of width to it. And I was saying that you could adjust things to make it look like you're simming a coat with a little bit of thickness. So that's what this is. So what you can do is you can come into your collisions, turn solver display to collision thickness, and now the rain jacket's puffed up a little bit, and this is basically where your collisions will start. And so you can puff that up. Where is it? It's this one, I think. Yeah, so you can puff that up as big as you need it to, depending on how thick. If you're doing like a big fluffy coat, like you might want it really thick. The important thing, though, is to always turn it back off, because that will slow down your sims so much and probably crash your computer. So just make sure you turn it off. And then if you've got really tight bends in your elbows, you may want to change your self-collide scale. But don't put it too low, because then it just won't work at all, and it'll do a lot of IPs. So right now, it does it in forms of little bubbles. You can change that to be the same as the self-collide, as like the surface, or you can do edges, whatever you think is going to work best depending on your sim. I like to put this down at 2 for this particular simulation. But again, those are just some settings that you can mess with to make things work the way you expect them to. And we will turn that back off, and we'll close that up. Next thing is your dynamic properties. So this is what controls what the simulation itself looks like. Drink water.
Hydration.
Yes. So the biggest one is going to be stretch resistance, compression resistance. Those are exactly what they sound like. This is how much is it going to stretch away from itself, how much are the edge lengths going to increase. Compression resistance is how much it's going to compress. And bend resistance is like floppiness. So we're going to crank this to 200 because we want it to stretch less, because it was stretching all the way off her body. It looked really goopy and disgusting. Compression resistance, you want to keep this number relatively low. Again, these are all scale dependent, so these numbers that I give you are going to be completely different from any sim that you ever do. So don't write down the numbers. So I'm going to put this at like 30 at most for this scale. The more you crank these numbers, the more, the slower your sim is going to be. And a lot of times the less stable it's going to be. Where it was exploding before, that was because it was fighting different properties. And if you tell it that like you don't want it to compress or bend and you want it to be stiff, but it's fighting against the arm bend, then it's just going to explode. So you have to find a nice balance between letting it be as stiff as you want it without putting pressure on it to make it fight the calculations and everything. So we're going to start with that and see what that does. And then we're going to come down here and again start with lift and drag at 0. Those are things that you want to dial in later. Right now we're just trying to get it to be stable and look like relatively normal. And then we'll get to the making it feel right. Okay. So there, now it looks a lot more like a coat. It's still sliding off her though. That, I just might need some more constraints for that one. Okay, so that's a little bit better. Still not super stable, so there's a couple things we can do. Okay, I'm gonna add some more constraints to the collar because I think it's not gonna stick. Just gonna try a whole bunch this time. Surface. I hate this so much. I don't know if that's gonna mess it up. Let's find out. Okay, so now it looks like it's actually gonna stick to her shoulders, which is nice, but it's still falling off of her arms, which is no good, and it's still really, really floppy. So we're going to, where did our dynamics go? There they are. Okay, back here. And what's next? Okay, so the next thing we probably want to mess with is, so input mesh attract is basically saying how much you want it to follow the original animation, the wrap that we did. So this is something that you can paint. which is lucky for us because remember how the bottom of the coat looked like absolute trash? But the sleeves looked relatively okay. They just didn't have a lot of like dynamic to them. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put this at like 0.8. You never want to put it at 100%. And then we're going to paint out the bottom of the jacket so that it's not following the wrap at all, and that will get most of the dynamics and the movement that we want, but then the sleeves are going to follow it a little bit better. And the maps you can constantly change and update and everything, so they're not like you can only do them once, they're like built in. So we'll go back to T-pose. Again, that's the easiest place to do these sorts of things. And you'll click on your mesh and you'll right click, paint nCloth Vertex maps, not this texture maps, make sure you're on Vertex maps. And then you can paint all these different attributes that are in your dynamics properties. But we're gonna start with input attract. You can see it's all red, so it's all going to be at 0.8 where we set it. Go into your tool settings. It works just like painting skin weights, except this time you can actually use the smooth function because you're not like balancing weights between two things. It's just percentages and it's all going to one thing. So we can replace it all, flood it to 0, and then replace 1, or we'll do 0.8, sure. And just paint in, we want this part to kind of follow. And this is a lot easier when you're doing the one-sided polys. If you're trying to sim a double-sided mesh, you're not gonna get the weight on both sides. It's just not gonna happen for you. And that's really gonna screw things up for you. And also, it's kind of hard to get around the lapels and the collar, which is another reason why we had them deleted in some of the shots. But yeah, so you're just gonna do something like that, and then you can just mass smooth it out so it doesn't look chunky. We'll add a little bit more where we want it to be really strong. Maybe right in the middle, that'll help stabilize things. But again, this is adding another constraint to it, so you don't want to go too crazy because this is another thing that the simulation is going to have to fight. So you may have to come in and reduce it on the sleeves if it's fighting it too much, or make another change somewhere else in the simulation. Okay, so at 351, oh boy. Let's see if I can get this stable. All right, then we'll just go back into object mode. Maybe we'll go into object mode. Okay, and we will go back to here, and we'll see what that does. Okay, so that's behaving a little bit better. A lot of this is just changing one thing and then testing it out and then changing it again and then testing it out, which can be a little impatient, but lucky for you, if you're working on a film and you're doing shot work, the settings are going to be really similar from shot to shot. Except like the only thing that's going to be drastically different is if you have a still shot where she's just like chilling out, not doing much, and then like a running shot. Those settings are going to be pretty different. So yeah, that's behaving a little bit better. So you notice with nCloth that you can't really scrub through and watch it because it doesn't like that. You have to let it play through. There is a way that you can actually scrub. So all you have to do is click on your mesh, go up to nCache, and create new caches and object. So for this, your project has to be set. Otherwise, it's going to throw it in your home space and clog up your home space, and caches take up a lot of room. And if you're working off the desktop, this is going to go faster than if you're working off of the iDrive. And your simulations are going to go faster, which is always the goal. Save yourself time. So we're going to create these caches, and they're going to go to the project that I already set, and then we'll be able to scrub. So with the caches, if you change a setting, you have to recache it. Otherwise, it won't show up, and you'll just keep changing settings, and you'll be like, why isn't this fixing things? And then you'll update your cache, and you'll be like, oh, this is completely different and not at all what I wanted. So make sure you recache it every time when you change things, which is a pain, which is why you don't have to use the caches if you don't want to. They're very helpful, though, again, when you get into the cleanup stage after it's already been stabilized a little bit, and you want to figure out where the exact problems are.
Does the cache like overwrite itself automatically when you recache it, or does it make a new one?
Depends on which button you click. I usually just overwrite it automatically. You have the option of creating multiple sets of caches and then blending them together. I've never used that, but I'm sure people who are better at Cloth Sim than I am utilize that more. But what I usually do is if I like a simulation, I'll cache it out as an Alembic and then just import that and use blend shapes. That makes more sense to me. But if you want to mess around with utilizing blending the caches, you can. All right, so now I can scrub through and see exactly what it's doing. And because it's cached, I can put it in, even put it in smooth preview. And it'll look a little bit less ugly. You don't want to simulate with anything in smooth preview. It's just, again, going to clog things up, make things way slower, probably crash something. Just keep things in the ugly mode, and yeah. So now that we've got that, we'll go back into our nCloth settings, and let's see. What should we change next? It's actually looking like halfway decent. I'm surprised.
Damp or something?
Yes, good point, good point. Okay, so down here you have damp and stretch damp. If your sim is doing some crazy things and just kind of acting whack, I don't know how else to describe it, you'll want to up your damp to like, start with 0.5 maybe. Stretch damp you can change as well, that's the stretching on it. If you're doing some really crazy running or something, the stretch damp is gonna come in handy. So we'll put that at 0.5, see if we can get it to calm down a little bit. It's really looking quite better than I expected to have it at this point. Okay, so then we'll need to recache it because again, we changed a setting and we want to see what it looks like. So we'll click on it, we'll go into nCache, and you'll do replace caches and object. And I believe if it's the option box, yeah, you can name your caches, and you can have like multiple different versions of a cache and keep them with you. But again, they take up a lot of room, so it's up to you. Cache, replace cache. And then just replace existing, or you can rename, auto rename, whatever. I replace them. It's gonna take a minute.
Do you have your animators set up the scene with all the cloth prep, or do you have to do it yourself on every shot you get? Like for the putting it in the T-pose and moving it into its spot?
Oh, no, I had the animators do that. Yeah, that's definitely something that it's the animator's responsibility. If you are working with people who are forgetful, like Aaron O'Neill, and you know how to script, you can write them a little script to get things working the way that you need them to. Because it can be a pain to recache out animation for some scenes, they're really heavy. So yeah, just make sure that the animators know what you need from them. As long as that's clearly communicated, usually they're not assholes about it. And so what we did for Wander was we basically wrote out a little document that said all of the things that we needed from them, and we put it up in the collab space, and we were like, everyone that's exporting your animation, look at this before you do it until you get into the habit of it. And it explained the T-pose and the negative frames, and there were a couple other things that we needed on there too. Okay, so it's cached out, and it's a little bit more natural now. Okay, so I'm going to go over editing the mesh now. Because that cloth is looking pretty okay. So sometimes your mesh is going to get in the way of you being able to animate, and we had this problem a lot on Wander. We didn't have the best skin weights in the elbows because we had planned on the jacket covering that up. So we had a lot of issues with the elbows pinching the simulation. If the cloth gets caught even a little bit in between two pieces of geometry, it will explode. There's so many different things that are going to cause explosions in your cloth sim. So what you can do is you can take your simulation, and we can use Tim Steele's favorite method, the Delta Mush. Delta Mush is another thing that is paintable. So if you have issues with like just your elbows, you can paint in the Delta Mush to just your elbows. So you'll click on your collision skin and you'll do, it's a deformer, isn't it? Yeah. You'll do deform, Delta Mush. Where are you? Hello. What did I just do? Did that work? Yes, okay. So you put the Delta Mush on and you're gonna mess with the scale, which is not what you do for any other Delta Mush usage. This is gonna get real scary again. Whoop! And we make her into a little twig. So this just like makes the elbows a lot skinnier. And then again, we'll right click, paint, and then down here you can do Delta Mush weights. Metadata. Weird. Okay, so right now she's all white, everything's set to 1. So we'll do replace 0, flood, and then we'll do add, do like 0.7 or something. Delta Mush looks pretty ugly if you flood it all to 1. So then you just kind of paint it in on the elbows, and this is another thing that you can utilize the smooth tool with. The only thing about doing this, when you crush the elbows, it might make your sim look nicer, but then when you put your render mesh on your animated render skin, your render skin elbows won't be crushed and they will poke through. So you just have to make sure that you fix that also and then re-export a new render skin. So if you're having issues, it's nice because the jacket will cover up your ugly, ugly crushed elbows, but you have to make sure that you do make them covered up. The other thing that this will do is it will cause your arms to look a lot skinnier. Maybe they won't hold the volume that a jacket would wrap around the arm that you would expect. So just be careful, don't go crazy with this. Yeah, so elbows are gonna give you issues. A lot of times underneath the armpits will give you big issues. So we can paint in some of that too. The underneath the armpits won't show up as much as like an elbow with the volume preservation, but if you go up on the shoulders, then that will really affect it, so try and stay off the shoulders for sure. The nice thing about this mesh is it's really nice and even, so when we put the Delta Mush on it, it does what we expect it to. If you put the Delta Mush on our original model, it will not look like this. It will look a lot worse. So we have this nice even edge flow that will help us out with that. And then you can go in and like flood smooth. Okay? Easy enough. Take it out of isolate perspective. And then you have some crushed elbows. And if this is slowing you down, then you can re-export this as an Olympic again. It might, it usually doesn't for me. It's something that I've been able to update as I go. But yeah, so now we will recache this because the collider is a different shape. You'll have to recache it again. And we'll go here. Click on our SimCage wrap and cache, replace cache. Finding that little menu can be a little bit of a pain. So if you put it in one of your shelves, having just something that you can click will be helpful if you're doing things over and over again. I think I have one on one of these here somewhere. But yeah. So say you're looking at this and you really like the way the bottom of the jacket is looking, but you're not too crazy about the arms. Maybe they're acting wild or just exploding and you just can't seem to fix them, and you do something like you change the space scale and suddenly the arms work, but the bottom looks terrible. You can Frankenstein these together by using blend shapes, which we did a lot of on Wander, because the jacket sleeves and the bottom of the jacket are shaped in a way that they don't usually behave in the way that you would expect them to. So what we would do is we would take the jacket and we would cache it out as an alembic, limit cache, export selection to alembic, the whole frame range, make sure you have all these beautiful checkboxes, and we'll call this Cage version 1.abc. Okay? Alright. And then we'll just hide that guy, and we will bring in Cage version 1. And that's down here. And we'll rename it. Then what you can do is you can bring back this guy, and we can do something drastic like change the space scale on the Nucleus. Or you know, let's make it stiffer on the nCloth. Let's do that. We will up the bend resistance, 0.5. Yeah, we'll do that. Maybe give it a little bit of drag. I don't know, change something on it. And then recache it. And I hope this doesn't make it explode.
May I ask a question? So, are we able to change the gravity orientation? Like,
Yep, you can do that. That is on your Nucleus. So all of your world-based settings are going to be on your Nucleus. So your gravity is here, gravity direction. You can even throw in some wind in there if you want. Wind noise, that'll give it like if you're doing a flag or something, that'll look good. Ooh, another thing I forgot to go over is substeps. So substeps are basically how quickly Maya is doing calculations. If you're doing really rapid movements and your arms are just like going through the air, again, this is more helpful on a run, you're gonna want to turn these up, because otherwise the arm will crash right through the jacket, because it's not calculating fast enough between frames, and your arm will be here and your cloth will be on it, and then your arm will be here and Maya will not have made the calculation in between. So if you turn that up to like 10 or 12, it's going to slow things down again, but that's going to give you a lot more accurate calculations. However, if you are doing a still scene, you're going to want your substeps to be low, which is why this one is working with only 3, because she's not moving a whole lot. If it's doing a lot of calculations at once and you're not moving much, it's going to look jittery, and different vertices are just going to like go crazy and have a whole bunch of noise on them. So if she's just standing still and you have your substeps at 12, it'll look like there's a party on her jacket. So that's something to keep in mind. Something that just, again, is shot driven, which is what all of Cloth Sim is. It's all shot driven.
Is that keyframeable? Do you know? Have you ever like
Yes,
keyframed it?
yes
Okay.
it is. Yeah, all of these are keyframeable. Most of them are paintable. The stuff on the Nucleus is not paintable, but the stuff on the actual nCloth settings, most of that's, you can paint the maps out, which is very, very helpful. That will really stabilize things. Yeah, So that's where all that is. Yeah. Alright. Back to the nCloth. Alright, so we cashed it out, and now the bottom of the jacket is like swinging around more maybe, but the sleeves are really stiff now. So what do you think? Should we do the bottom of the jacket from the old version and then the sleeves maybe, or other way around? What do you want to combine? What are we going to Frankenstein here?
I like all the wrinkles on the other one in the bottom.
Okay.
So maybe we could have like stiff sleeves, super wrinkled bottom.
Okay, we'll do that. So we'll just bring that out of hiding, and this is going to be our target, our old simulation that we cached out, and then we will click the new simulation that still has the nCloth settings on it, and we'll just do deform, blend shape. Why do I keep getting that flash? Did it work? It didn't work. Deform, blend shape, and we'll call it, actually, just kidding, they already made it. Alright, so we'll turn that on, and now it's following along perfectly with it, which is not what we want. We want the sleeves of the new animation. So we're going to just hide our old animation, and we'll do paint, blend shape, target weights, and go back into T-bows. And this is just like, if you guys have ever painted weights before, it's exactly the same as that. So we'll do replace 0 on the sleeves. And this is something that you're gonna want to make nice and even and smooth, so it doesn't, you don't see any like weird kinks or seams in the two different simulations. So lucky for us, she has this nice little cinch that makes a good spot to cut things off where we want to paint things. So that looks nice and even, and then we'll just flood smooth it. Oh, I missed some stuff. Ha. We'll get this nice little sherbet thing. And that'll make it so that you can't see the seam between the two different blend shapes. If they're acting funny, you can like really go crazy with that smooth if you need to. And then we'll just go back, and we will have the old bottom, but the new sleeves. Now that's kind of looking pretty good. Okay, so another thing that you need to remember when you're doing shot work is you want to have your camera finaled, because you will never get a perfect sim, ever, unless you're working for Disney and are very talented. So you want to be able to do your sims to camera. If there's stuff freaking out back over on this arm, but you're only seeing this arm, you don't have to fix that. So if my camera is over here, and you just see this arm, she's got a little bit of crunchiness and IP in her elbow that we really don't like, but we don't have to worry about it because it's not to camera, which is very nice. But if we did want to fix this, this is going to be, let's see, what can we do to fix this? Yeah, so you see, watch these little verts in here, they're gonna dance around a little bit because they're colliding with each other. You see them going? They're doing some ugly things. So we can fix that with, we can fix it with damp. We can paint damp to be a lot stronger in the elbow. Or we can, let's see, editor. So we can crank damp to like 0.8. Actually, let's do it like 3, something crazy. And we'll turn down our compression resistance to like 15 maybe. Usually I wouldn't advise changing multiple settings at once when you're first learning how to do this. Once you get better at it, you know what things do and you'll be able to predict it. But when you're first doing it, definitely always change one setting at a time, just a little bit at a time, until you get used to what they do. Okay, so we're gonna give it less things to fight so that maybe it doesn't freak out as much and it will give us a nicer wrinkle. And we will, what else did I crank? Oh, we'll turn down drag. We'll turn this down to like 150 maybe and see what that does. Now we should still have the bottom looking the way that we want it to because we use that blend shape, but the sleeves might change drastically because they changed a lot of things. I'm also going to turn down the self-collide scale to 1.8, maybe give it a little bit more space. And yeah. All right, let's start with that. See what that will do. I love blend shapes. They'll do fun stuff like that. Oh, I have to cache it. Don't forget to cache it. Not effects anymore. And you see, the more things we add to this, the slower this cache is going to go, and the slower your simulation is going to go. Once you start fine-tuning it a little bit more and getting it more stable, you want to actually play blast it, because that's going to give you the fastest and most real-time results. Maya doesn't do a good job of giving you real-time animation, and it's going to look drastically different. You want the timing to be right, because otherwise the cloth is going to feel too heavy or too loose. So once you're more into the later stages of doing your sim, definitely try play blasting it and seeing what it looks like. Okay. So we've done that. Bottom still looks good. The sleeves aren't freaking out. Let's see what the crunchiness looks like. It's still crunching a good bit, but it's not freaking out as much. So we've made a little bit of progress. This is gonna be something that's pretty difficult to fix. Ooh, I know. So in this case, maybe we want to paint out the input mesh attract so it follows less of the wrap, because the wrap had a lot of that IP when her elbow folded. So we'll paint that back down just in that one spot to 0 and see if that helps stabilize it a little bit more. Paint, cloth, input. So right now it's like pretty high and it's trying to follow that a lot. So we'll just paint that back down to like 0.2 maybe. Could probably even go lower than that. Yeah. Let's get crazy with it. So these don't have to be like super duper smooth, like they don't have to exactly follow the edge loops. I've done these pretty messy before, but you do want there to be like a gradient in colors. They don't have to like necessarily follow the edge loops perfectly. Okay, so that should help it a little bit, probably. I think I'm gonna put it down a little bit more. Now I will warn you, cloth sim is not a fast thing. I'm going through this quite quickly. When you're doing shot work, it's gonna take you a couple of days to get a really nice looking shot. And sometimes you're just gonna need a break from it because you're gonna look at it again and again and again. And having other people look at it and tell you what they think of it often fresh eyes are very helpful. So definitely look for critique, look for input, and take a day off of it. Sometimes you'll run into a problem and you will have no idea how to fix it, and then you'll go to sleep and you'll come back and you'll fix it in like 20 minutes. Yeah, especially when you're starting out, it's going to be quite frustrating working with it. Okay, so let's see what that does. Yep, I want to be here. Gosh, that looks beautiful. Yep. I think that looks like it folded a little bit better. Check her out. I think that might have made it worse. Well, yeah, that happens. That made it worse. Okay, well, maybe that wasn't the solution. Alright, well, I'm not going to waste time showing you guys all the fidgeting and going back and forth between settings, because again, that's something you really just need to practice and spend hours on, which is unfortunate. So the last thing I want to show you is in the end constraints, this, where is it? Transform constraint, there it is, okay. So a lot of times the sim, when you're getting into that first pose, isn't going to do exactly what you want it to. We had a shot where she was crouching down, and so she starts out in T-pose, and then she goes into a like crouched position, and the coat was getting stuck in between her calves and her thighs, and it was pinching and freaking out. You couldn't get it to fix. So you can make these sims look as ugly as you want before the shot starts. So what you can do is you can go into her T-pose position right before the sim starts. I'm actually going to turn off this blend shape for a second. So this is something you would probably want to do before you Frankenstein things together. Please work. Okay. So say we want her tailcoat to drape over her feet when she's squatting down, which is what we were doing for this shot. What you can do is you can kind of like pin it in space and hold it and then let it go to sort of manipulate the simulation to go into the position that you want. And it kind of works like a cluster, basically. So we'll go into Vertex mode, we'll select a chunk. Doesn't have to be pretty. I want a small chunk though. And we will do end constraint, transform constraint. Okay? So now we have this little thing, and you can animate it around. I would, if I were you, label this again. So this is going to be your tailcoat transform constraint. And then these, it's going to give you like non-zero positions, so if you want, you can group it and animate that instead. Just make sure the pivots are the same. And then when you drag the group around, you can zero it out back to its original position. You don't have to do that if you're not animating it, but that is an option. So we're going to key its translate X at 0, and then maybe pull it out here and key that. Oh, I keyed them in the same place. Whoops. Maybe at 25. We'll key it like up a little bit. That's translate Y. Out a little bit. Okay. So now that'll just like move along, and right now it's not doing anything because of the cache. But you can see it moving, and it's just going to drag those verts out in space. Okay. So we'll go ahead and recache this. And you can see what it does. See? Drags them out. But then as she moves, it's going to keep holding on to them. So then all you would do is just key it on and off.
Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what it does. Alright, that's enough. You can also like pound escape to get out of caching things if it's taking too long, if you don't have patience. Or if it's like immediately freaking out, there's no point in recaching it all the way. Okay, so they're kind of annoying. You can't really select them in the viewport, so you have to have your outliner open. So we'll go ahead and it's just this enable button. So you'll key that on, and then maybe we want it to let go. Like here, it's gonna snap. This is not a good example of like how to do this. It's just gonna snap the cloth back in place, and it's gonna look funny, but it'll be fun.
Does it
Alright.
have like an envelope or anything?
Oh yeah, no, it's just enable. I think it might have something else down here. Maybe not. Yeah, usually this is something, it's gonna make ugly deformations, so you want to keep it in the run-up. It's not something you want to use really during animations. For tweaking animation, or for tweaking like maybe you have something collide and doing some cleanup stuff, you're gonna wanna use like clusters or again blend shapes, something that you can have some fall off with, or a soft transform. Just something that isn't going to make these really ugly stretching and pulling and tearing of geometry. These are just for like setting the sim up to do what you want it to do before it starts. So this is still in the negatives. Alright, so we'll recache that and see what she does. Did I key it on off? I think I did.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, see it kind of snaps back into place. It's not really useful for this particular sim, but if she's crouching down and you just want to hold it up while she crouches down and then let go of it so it drapes nicely over the back of her feet, that's what we used it for. It was super helpful. It's also a little bit of a wacky workaround if your point constraint, or I'm sorry, point to surface isn't working. I'll show you how we did that. We had just one shot where we could not get it to work. And then I think that's the last thing I'm going to show you guys. Because this demo is going on for a minute. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that for now. Find her at T-pose. Okay. So say your point constraint just won't work, it's being difficult, you don't know what to do, and you've tried restarting Mind, deleting your settings and preferences, whatever, and it's just being real difficult for whatever reason, because it does that sometimes. What you can do is you can select your verts, and you'll do your transform constraint on that. Constraint, transform constraint. And then you have that, but that's just gonna stick around and like hang out in space and not move anywhere, and counter animating that would be a pain in the butt. We're not gonna do that. So we're gonna utilize the surface attach. This is a really janky way to set this up, and it's not ideal, but it does work. And because the point to surface is so finicky, I think it's necessary to show you guys this. So if you've not used it before, we need to get out of symmetry. If you've not used it before, all you gotta do is select some edges. We'll pick maybe this edge, that's probably close enough to where the collar is gonna be. And then, is it under rigging? Yeah, it's a deformer. So you'll go deform. Where is it? Deform. Where's muscle?
Oh, you probably have to load the plugin.
I probably have to load the plugin. Yep. Do you know what the name of the plugin is?
I think it's just like Maya Muscle or something.
Is it muscle? Yep, there it is. Okay. So this little plugin is what you want. Please load it. Thank you. Okay, and then deform, muscle, bonus rigging. What's that? And then do surface touch. Okay. That's in a really bad place. I'm gonna try that again. It put this little locator down here, and that's what it's supposed to do, but it put it in a really ugly place, so I'm just gonna try that again. Sometimes you have to select more than one edge to make it go where you want it to. Okay, see, now that's more where we want it. And we got our surface attach, and then all you gotta do is take your dynamic constraint and put it as a child of the surface attach, and then it will follow along the way that you want it to. And I'll recache this to prove it. And again, this isn't the most ideal way of doing things, but when you're in a pinch, it'll work. It would also be good for maybe if your sleeve is falling down, when she puts her arm up in the air, you could put it to that, because this way it lets you keep a little bit of swing and movement. It's less tough of a constraint. So it does give you a different effect than what the other method would give you. I think it's a bit slower.
I think surface attach has a little bit of lag.
Yeah. Okay. Please, can I have it? Okay, so see, followed along and it stayed with her and it's looking nice. All right, I'll turn that blend shape back on so it looks nice again. Okay, so now that's basically the gist of getting your simulation to look nice and behave. So now we have our sim cage doing what we want it to, and it looks the way that we like it, and we want our render mesh to follow that. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna cache this out as an alembic. When you're doing high poly things, you wanna try and use like a nice clean empty scene. So caching things out as alembics will let you transfer them into a new scene, and you'll still keep the animation and everything, and it'll make your caching a lot faster. So that's why we're doing this so many times. So we'll export your sim cage to an alembic, export, and we'll name it sim cage. You can call it like sim cage final or just like version it up. A lot of times you'll get somewhat different looking results once you put the actual render mesh on it, so you might want to go back and tweak it, so it might not be final. So we'll just version it up for now. Okay, and then save out your scene. This is an untitled scene. I'm doing so well. We'll just call this sim test VO1 .ma, and then we'll just open up a completely new scene, and we'll pull in limbic. We'll pull in our sim cage. Make sure you have the right frame range so you can actually see it. Promise it's there. And we'll pull in our animation, which is here. And this is our render mesh. We don't need the ugly one anymore. because now we're going to be doing like cleanup and like making sure it looks nice with the render skin. And then we will import our nope, this one. We'll import a blank version of our low poly jacket again that won't have any animation or sim on it. It's just T-pose, and we'll bring in our render mesh. Okay. So now you have a nice clean scene, and there's not like lots of deformers and stuff clogging it up, so it's gonna like cache out a lot faster. You don't have to do this, but it's gonna save you some life, I promise. Okay. So that's our wrap ABC, anim, and this is our sim cage. So this is where our sim cage ref comes in. And our render mesh. So we're going to do the same method that we did before with the wrap and then the blend shape. And we do this because we just want a little bit of a buffer in between. So this is, again, where you would want those colored shaders so you can see which is doing what. So if we... So if we go off in space, we're going to take our high poly render mesh, and we're going to click the SimCage ref and wrap it to that. Form, wrap. Tell me why this is happening. Okay, so I made the wrap. Now, reminder again, wraps are incredibly slow. So this is definitely a last step. Use them as little as possible. So in this case, if you have a render mesh that has some like extra pizzazz on it, if you've got like little buttons attached or like maybe some stitches that are extra geometry, you can keep those all on the render mesh, and they're all wrapped to T-pose. And if you attach them to the render mesh and then attach the render mesh to the SimCage ref, then they're all going to follow along with it. And you might need to tweak it like a little bit maybe, but you're not going to have to do a lot of cleanup that way. Okay, so now the render mesh is going to do whatever this SimCage ref is doing. The SimCage ref is the same geometry as what you did the simulation on, your actual SimCage. So all you have to do is select your target and then your SimCage ref and then blend shape it. And we'll call that anim blend shape, or we'll call it SimCage ref blend shape. Okay. Create. Hello. Oh, you know what I did? I edited the SimCage. I took those edge loops out. That's okay. So if it's not working perfectly, if you do something like take out the edge loops, like I did, we'll just delete the history on those. Delete. I type history. Okay. And we'll go back to, again, helpful if you start off in T-pose. This is why we do it. So we'll isolate this, and so you can't, fun fact, you can't duplicate Olympics. So if you duplicate it, this won't have the Olympic node on it anymore, and it's just a T-pose version of your Olympic. So we'll change this to our SimCage ref so that the blend shape actually works. So if your blend shape's not working, just do it that way. Okay. Part 2, render mesh, SimCage ref, to form, wrap. Okay? Off in space. Okay, SimCage ref, to form, blend shape. Turn it on. Ta-da! Now it's following along. Then if you hide these and hide this, then you have this. Where's my body? Oh, I'm in isolate. There it is. And now it plays along nicely. You can scrub, and make sure that you don't have any IPs or stuff like that. We've got a little bit of funky stuff going on in here. So stuff like this is what you would want to clean up, where it's doing crazy things. You can come in and edit your sim cage from here because it's an Alembic. You can do things like apply a delta mush to smooth out some really crazy wrinkles. You can do sculpt deformers on it, but I wouldn't go too crazy with that. If you know how to animate vertices, you can do that. I personally don't, but yeah, you can fix it with like clusters or whatever. Whatever you need to do to make it look nice and clean, and then your render mesh, you can just turn that wrap on and off in the channel box over here. Keep it off while you're editing things, again, to keep things moving quickly. And then you can just see the Insta update to make sure that it worked. And then you'll just export this as an ABC and hand that off to lighting. And that's it.
Show us the one that you have in the
Yeah.
video.
I have a couple of videos of some stuff that we did for Wander. Yeah. So these are just a couple little sneak previews from Wander that we did. This one was a fun shot to do. She had to interact with, she jumped down off of this rock in a different shot, and so we had, like, this romper was a collider, the boots were a collider, the rock was a collider. Having lots of colliders will also slow things down. But yeah, so after spending a week a piece probably on these shots, they turned out really nice. We're quite proud of them. And soon you'll get to see them rendered and lit and looking all nice. Yeah.
All right. So I know that ran really long. So who is still interested in seeing the Houdini side of things really fast? Okay, we'll go through it because like a lot of it's the same material, just with different names. So if you understand what's going on here in the Maya side, it's just a matter of like, what are the nodes? So here's what I got for you guys. We have this ugly gremlin that we don't need. We can delete. I've set up a geometry node in Houdini, and basically the way Houdini works is, like Althea was saying, you get this like palette of different nodes and nodes nested within nodes. And so it's like the history in Maya, except it doesn't explode, and you can go back and edit things like whenever you want. So in here, I've basically got, I have a cloth that's going to be our render mesh. I have a low poly version of that same cloth, basically, because this is just the exact same cloth that I extruded over here. I have a sphere that we're going to use as a collider, and I have a ground plane. I think I will show you what they all look like in the same window by using a merge node. Yeah, that's our sphere. This is our low poly, and this is our high poly. And so basically, I'm just going to have this cloth relax over this sphere. The very most basic thing you can do in Houdini. Anytime you're trying to figure out a new setup, I would do it with primitives instead of going full in with animated geometry, because otherwise you'll go crazy trying to figure out where the problem is. So we don't need this node. This merge node is nice though, because it just lets you combine a bunch of inputs into a single input. The system that Houdini uses for cloth, there's a couple different ones, but the one that I know is called Vellum, and it's actually pretty new. They just implemented it not that long ago. It uses like a grain system. It's like basically using particles to drive cloth. Particles that are like attached to springs. You get a bunch of orbs, and then they're all connected and they spring away and towards each other. So the nodes you're going to need for this, the first thing you need is a vellum constraint. And all those nodes you were seeing in this tab menu that were under vellum, these are actually 90% of them are vellum constraints that are just specific ones, but you can access them all through this one node. And you set the constraint type here. And since we're using cloth, I'm going to set this to cloth.
The things you plug in are, in your first input here, you need the geometry, that's your cloth. In this case, we're going to, just like before, simulate the low poly version and then wrap it back onto the high poly version. So our low poly cloth is our vellum geometry. Our constraint geometry is, we don't actually need that, I think, because that's for like influences. And then our collision geometry, we need to merge our sphere and our ground plane together so that it'll collide with both. And we'll just plug that in over there. If you want to see something in Houdini, what's happening, you have to visualize it. Right now, this isn't going to do anything because we haven't plugged it into the Vellum solver. So we need to take another node, Vellum solver, which is all the way at the bottom here, and hook it up to everything. And if we've done this right, when we visualize the Vellum solver and press play, there's a little eyepiece that's probably going to break, but it should just drape a little bit. Look at that. Awesome. That's actually working great. The way you would adjust the properties of this cloth is back up in the constraint. You can go and turn down stiffness is the exact same as stiffness in Maya. Bend stiffness is the same. Damping ratios are the same. And it actually cuts the number of attributes you have down a bunch because it's based on the type of constraint you have. Like if I were to set this to a different type like hair or struts, which are two other really useful ones, you would get completely different attributes. So I'm just gonna turn our stiffness down to like 10,000 because it was at like 1e to the 100th or something. Turn the bend stiffness down to like 0.05. We can just see how that reacts. That looks pretty neat. So that's the basic way you can set up a cloth. Then what we'll do is take this and make a null node. And this is basically just going to feed out our cloth output into a blank group that we can access later from a different like geometry group. So that way we can separate out our like wraps and our simulation. So I actually need to make two because I have our high poly cloth in here and we need to be able to access that from our wraps as well. So I'm gonna have two null nodes. One of them hooked up to our vellum geometry and the other one hooked up to our high poly geometry over here. And I'll call this one out sim, and this is out. You want to use caps because when you're going and looking through nodes, it takes things that are in caps and puts them at the top of the list. Call this out render mesh. Alright, so I'm going to go back out to our main level and make another geonode. And I'll just call this wraps. And in here, we are going to use a object merge node. And this is how we access things that are in other networks. You basically go and find it under object 1 in our geo 1 thing here. You can see the things that we made our null nodes are at the top of the list. So we'll merge in our simulation, and we'll make another object merge node, and we will merge in our render mesh. Oh, and there's one more thing we need to merge, so we actually need another out node. It needs the static version of the simulation. And since we can access all our history, we can actually get that just by putting a null node up here on our low poly cloth. So we'll just say up here, our low poly cloth, this is going to be out static. How do you spell static? Is that how you?
Yep.
My brain is like completely broken, but this is static sim cage. This is the non-moving version of our sim cage. We will need to merge that in as well. I'm actually gonna, there's a viewport setting that's on that's ghosting other objects from other networks. I'm gonna turn that off, so we're only going to see what we have visualized. And then the node that you use to do the wrap in Houdini is called a point deform. But it basically behaves the exact same as the wrap. You merge in the mesh you want to deform. In this case, this is our render mesh. You merge in the rest point lattice, which is our object merge over here, our static sim cage, and we merge in our deformed lattice, which is this guy here, and then we'll visualize that. And you'll see we have our double-sided render mesh that is deforming in the exact same way. The other thing you have to do in Houdini to get like real-time playback on your cached playback is turning on this real-time toggle. And that'll fall nicely. And you can always go in and like you can up the radius on this to change how smooth it is, and you can even put a delta mush on it, which is the exact same as it is in Maya, and you get this like nice wrinkly deformed cloth with double side everything.